Hello and welcome to this British Academy event, Cows Eat Grass, Don't They? My name is Adam Stead and I am one of the panellists for this evening's event. Tonight's event forms part of the British Academy Summer Showcase, a free festival of ideas for curious minds. The festival celebrates the best new research in history, psychology, sociology and more, with online talks, discussions, and demonstrations, plus self-guided audio walks taking place throughout the week. You can find out more at britishacademy.ac.uk/summer showcase. As mentioned, I'm Adam. I'm a practicing artist and technician at Reading School of Art. As an artist, my work engages with the sometimes awkward and challenging intersections between rural and urban. My work raises questions in relation to rural agricultural landscapes, specifically dairy farming, to fertilise conversation and discussion around the topic. I often use agriculturally specific materials such as steel, cattle marker and cement to create installations that engage directly with the context of my practice. You can find out more about my work by visiting adamstead.co.uk or following me on Instagram at adamstead. However, tonight I'm stepping into the medium of film with Project Feed, but more to come on that a little later. Now, it gives me great pleasure to be joined this evening by British Academy Postdoctoral Fellow, Dr. Orla Shortall, cheese expert Ned Palmer, and Dr. Ollie Douglas, curator at the Museum of English Rural Life. If you would like to ask a question during the event, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have time to answer a few of these questions towards the end of the event. If your question is for a particular speaker, please indicate who it's for when adding your question. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Orla to tell us all about what cows are really eating these days.
Thanks very much, Adam. So I am a British Academy postdoctoral research fellow. I had the good fortune to study dairy farming for 3 years. And I'll start off by asking you a question about your views on modern dairy farming. So my project was looking at the role of grass and grazing in the UK and Irish dairy sectors. And most of us don't know much about dairy farming, but one of the few things we do know is that cows eat grass. But actually, if you look at the industry today, about 20% of farms in the UK house the cows all year round. So the cows don't actually graze. And they do that so the farms can get bigger and produce more. Because on conventional dairy farms, the cows will stay aside in the summer months, in spring and summer, and will walk into the parlour 2 or 3 times a day to be milked. And then in the winter months, they'll stay inside and eat conserved grass in the form of silage and bought in feed. And on these 20% of indoor farms, the cows stay inside, so they eat conserved grass and they eat higher energy density feeds like cereals, so they produce more milk and they don't have to walk in and out every day to the grazing platform, to the parlour. And this has been quite controversial among the public, the idea of indoor dairy farming. So part of my research was looking at how is indoor dairy farming seen by people within the industry. So by farmers, by people who work in the industry, and comparing views in the UK to Ireland. So I want to start off by asking you, you've come to this event, you're obviously interested in dairy farming. So a poll should pop up on your screen saying, do you think cows should graze for part of the year? Yes, no, or unsure. And obviously there's no right or wrong answer here. It's not testing. I'm not going to tell you at the end what you should think about this. It's completely up to you. Do you think cows should graze for part of the year, which is the conventional dairy system, as opposed to an indoor system? Yes, no, or unsure. and you should be able to answer that on your screen. There has been research with the public. There's been various surveys, academic and industry polls with the public, whereas there hasn't actually been research with people working in the dairy industry itself. So I'll tell you a little bit more about my research as the event goes on as well. Most of the research, I don't want to sway your answer, but most of the research has found that people prefer cows to graze for part of the year. So I think the answers kind of range between 60 and 90% for people thinking cows should graze, because that's a system we're used to, that in the UK and Ireland especially. Countries such as Denmark, 75% of farms keep the cows indoors all year round, which is quite different to the UK and Irish context. So we have a result in, do you think that cows should graze for part of the year? And yes was 90%. So that's very interesting, because that's quite high. So I'll be interested to see at the end if that view has changed at all. Again, I'm not trying to change your opinion in any sort of a way, but we'll ask again at the end. And another question, have you ever been on a dairy farm? So this is just to get a sense of who our audience is. If you've ever visited a farm, do the farms have open days, that sort of thing? It can be any sort of dairy farm, large, commercial, small, hobby sort of farm. So have you ever been on a dairy farm? Yes or no? And you should be able to fill that in. Because one of the things that my research, I wasn't researching directly with the public, but I think it's true that there's more and more of a divide between people who work in the industry and people outside of the industry in terms of our knowledge and connection to farming. I'm from Ireland myself, and my grandparents were farmers on both sides. Adam, my artist collaborator, well, not my artist, Adam, an artist in his own right, comes from a farming background as well. So have you ever been on a dairy farm? Wow, 88% saying yes. Okay, that's much higher than I was expecting. Okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to people's questions and contributions so later on. And before we get on to the rest of the events, I will give you a comedic talk about my research. And I thought I should make it clear from the outset that this is a comedic talk. So you know, A, you're supposed to laugh when I pause. And B, you don't take any of my self-deprecating comments seriously, and you know that my research is very clever and very important. Because my research was voted number 4 in a BuzzFeed list of clever and important research about hegemonic structures governing human-animal productivist relations in the late capitalist Anthropocene. I paused. And I used to do stand-up comedy as a hobby before the plague, which I really enjoyed. I loved it. Like, if nothing else, Aberdonian off-duty oil rig Saturday night crowds really made snooty professors at conferences a lot easier to deal with. Oh, you're saying my methods are questionable and my conclusions unfounded? Dude, unless that's accompanied by a flying bottle of Stella, I'm not worried. If they tell you that you're not up to date with the current literature, you know you have to watch yourself in the car park after the conference. And I am an agricultural social scientist, which often involves sitting down with farmers, interviewing them about their job, which really confuses the farmers. They're like, so your job is to talk to me about my job? And I'm like, yeah, there's hundreds of us. We have a conference every year where we talk about you. Don't come, it'd be weird. And a lot of research these days is interdisciplinary. So the funders will say to the scientists, we'll give you money, but you have to involve the social scientists, which is a bit like when your mother would say to you, okay, you can go outside and play, but you have to bring your sister. So a lot of the work we do kind of ends up being like a wing person to the natural scientists. Well, they'll come up with an idea, like a breed of cow that emits less methane. And then they'll ask us, how can we get farmers to use this cow? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a farmer whisperer. Give it a snazzy name like the Methanotron 3000, which is not an easy thing for an Irish person to say. So it was an absolute joy and pleasure to get funding from the British Academy to research something I was passionate about for 3 years, which was answering the question of why some cows eat a lot of grass and some cows don't eat much grass, which I'm sure has kept you up at night as well. And because in Ireland, farmers are obsessed with grass. Like, it's easy to grow, it's cheap. We're called the Emerald Isle. So I say we, but I've been living in the UK for 12 years. So I think it's only a matter of time before I'm kicked out of the People of Ireland WhatsApp group. A lot of Jedward memes. Whereas in the UK, more farmers are kind of more ambivalent about grass. Like, they see it as more difficult to grow, the weather is difficult. So more farmers in the UK buy in more of their feed. And like I said, that kind of the ultimate, the kind of the what's the word of the kind of ultimate end of that is indoor dairy farming, where the cows don't graze grass, they conserve grass and bought in feed. And often when indoor dairy farming is talked about in the media, the word industrial is used, or by charities. And I think that was what got me into research in agriculture. I was always interested in this idea of what is industrial farming? What's the opposite of industrial farming? Like, is it a bad thing if farming is industrial? Because on one hand, agriculture is a high-tech, efficient industry. But on the other hand, it is at the site of our connection with the natural world. It involves self-generating processes. So, and if you're saying indoor dairy farming is industrial, you're saying that it's gone too far towards that scale of industrial, and the animals are being treated as components in a production process rather than as living creatures, which obviously, we're not comfortable with, because cows aren't the same as drill bits. Though drill bit would be quite a cute name for a cow. And during lockdown, I was kind of wondering, like, is what I do useful? Is academia just lots of middle-class white people sending each other emails until we die? But which I haven't answered that one way or another. But I also realized that the thing I enjoy most about my job is I get to speak to people who I wouldn't meet in day-to-day life. And kind of the conclusion I've come to from interviewing farmers and visiting farms is that indoor dairy farming isn't fundamentally different from grazing farming in terms of that scale of industrial natural, because farmers in all systems, whether they're grazing, whether they're indoors, relate to their animals in terms of care. They care about their animals, but they also have to relate to them in terms of productivity and profitability. It's just the nature of the system. Like, I remember years ago going to a meeting for a different project where a vet was talking to beef farmers, and he said to them, if you have a cow that isn't in calf, you need to get rid of her. Like, she might be your favorite cow. If she's not pregnant, she's costing you money. And that makes complete sense. Like, that's the line in the industry. But at the time, there was something about it that just struck me as kind of brutal in a kind of everyday sort of a way, because beef farmers really aren't in it for the money. Like, beef farmers are in it despite the money. I once met a beef farmer who described his cows as expensive therapy, which I hope no one ever tells Gwyneth Paltrow about that idea, because that will not end well. So basically, as a left-leaning social scientist, I've come to the shocking conclusion that capitalism is flawed. I'm preparing a tweet. We should have a different system of value exchange within a week. Hashtag there is no invisible hand. Hashtag plot twist. And if not, I will pin a polite notice to the door of the Bank of England with several exclamation marks. And if this is something you're interested in, I would recommend, I'm really impressed 88%, not that it's something people need to do, but I'm surprised 88% of people have been to a farm, and you're obviously people who are interested in where your food comes from. And you're in for a kind of an interesting discussion about cheese and examples from the Museum of English Rural Life later as well. And I'll leave you with a cow fact, because everybody likes cow facts. So the way cows produce methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, and one of the reasons that livestock farming, particularly dairy farming and beef, are controversial at the moment. So whenever people talk about methane, they always talk about cow farts, but actually it's 90 to 95% cow burps, because cows chew the cud, they swallow their food, they regurgitate it, they chew it again, they swallow it, and that process involves a lot of burping. And occasionally it does happen that a cow will burp and fart at the same time, which is just the cow's body's way of taking a screenshot. So on that note, I will hand back to Adam.
Thank you, Orla. I know that would have made quite a few people in the audience tonight chuckle, so that was very good indeed. Now, I'm going to talk to you briefly about Project Feed before showing you the trailer of the film. Project Feed was commissioned and developed in response to Orla's research. And my ambition with Project Feed was to engage and situate dairy farmers at the core of the project to enable a better understanding of the socio-economic complexities in rural agricultural landscapes. It will be no surprise for you to hear that COVID-19 has had a significant effect on how I approached this work, particularly where travel was concerned. Therefore, I had to develop remote working relationships with farmers, which can be a challenge where modern technology is concerned, especially for me. My engagement with farmers revolved around asking and instructing them to take short video clips of their farms over the summer of 2020. The resulting film these clips are part of, which is titled Feed, highlights the diversity and breadth of dairying from a variety of farms across the UK and Ireland. And so for the first time, I'm delighted to present to you the trailer for the film, Feed.
I think we would see fewer dairy farms in unsuitable places where there isn't any grass. You always get more milk when the cows are grazing. And when you bring them in the winter, milk will always go down. Doesn't matter, it always increments down a bit and the milk protein will go down. So I call it Dr. Green. There's always something in grass.
Concentrate feed is expensive and should be fed in an efficient and targeted way. But if a cow is willing to work and willing to keep milking, then she'll get fed for as long as she's above 35 litres, she'll be getting 8 kilos.
To be fair, maybe when we were in the quota era, the cow wasn't being allowed fed to achieve her potential. And I think there's better utilisation both of grass and the substitutes at times, more appropriate use of the substitutes at times.
So I'm hoping at some point to be able to show the full film in person in the near future. So for updates on that and where it might be, please do follow me on Instagram at the account @DairyLexicon. Now, it's no secret to those involved in Project Feed from its conception to its completion that I could not have done it without the help of an array of talented, knowledgeable people, many of whom are listed in the credits. However, there are a few I want to highlight now. So particular thanks go to Stephanie Mitchell for keeping everything running in the background and administering the project. Thanks also to my editor, Robbie McCain, my agricultural content advisor, Robert Stead, and last but not least, Dave Marin, who has given me a lot of practical production guidance prior to shooting the film. So thank you everyone for your support. Now, we're moving back to Orla for something a little more interactive for you at home. Orla, what's next?
I'm really looking forward to this part. This is our cheese tasting. So we thought it'd be interesting. Usually sort of food is divided between kind of artisanal produce, where we think about the origin, we think about the taste, and then maybe more mainstream conventional produce, where it's just an anonymous standardized product that we buy and eat without maybe kind of savoring or focusing on. So we wanted to mix that up a little bit with our cheese tasting and use both artisanal and kind of conventional products. And we're absolutely delighted to have a cheese expert here. I have his book, A Cheesemonger's History of the British Isles. He's a freelance cheesemonger, which is an even cooler job title than agricultural social scientist. So over to you, Ned.
Thanks, Orla. Oh, thanks for that smashing introduction. I was jealous about your job title, actually. Maybe we could swap over at times. I bet you'd make an amazing freelance cheesemonger. So I bought 3 cheeses, and they do cover that sort of, I suppose we call it a spectrum of methods of production, or certainly of methods of feed. But the first thing we're going to have to do is learn how to taste cheese mindfully like a professional, but we'll do that with our first cheese. So this is a cheese called Summerfield. And the first thing you want to do when tasting cheese is to observe it, to have a look at your cheese. You see that lovely sort of rich yellow colour that tells us it's cow's milk. If this was a goat's milk, it'd be nice, pale, snowy white, but this is a lovely rich cow's milk. Something that suggests to me that this is going to be a cheese with a bit more pedigree and a bit more complexity to it is its sort of artisanal nature, in that it's kind of round. This comes from a rounded cheese. If we go straight to my final cheese, the more, all the industrial cheese, it's more square. Anyway, back to the Summerfield. So we've noticed the lovely colour, we noticed the lovely sort of shape of it. And then the next thing to do is to touch your cheese, to give it a squeeze. There's no better technical term. Because this is a hard cow's milk cheese, I want it to have some hardness, and it does. My fingertips are going a bit white by squeezing it like that. It's important that you only squeeze your own cheese, don't squeeze other people's cheese. It's not acceptable. And then very, very close to eating, but the next thing is to smell it. So often you could crack it, and then you really get some of the aroma at that freshly broken edge. And I'll lead the witness a bit in that this has got a lovely fruity, almost tropical aroma. And that tells me one thing I really strongly suspect: these cows have been eating a complex diet of food that they are sort of evolved to eat, and is they find very satisfying. So there's one hint to me that this is something with that more trad feed. And then, having smelled your cheese, you can then actually eat it, which I won't do because I'm talking and I'll spray the screen with cheese, and that would be weird. But pay attention to the flavour, pay attention to the narrative structure of flavour. So a proper lovely cheese like this should have a beginning, and then as it develops on the palate, you'll get that developing flavour, more complexity. And then pay attention to the finish. Even after you've finished eating your bit of cheese, you should get some length. You'll get some of that complexity. So a really great cheese, even a mild one for me, has some length. Now, I tried some of this earlier, so I can tell you that it has a kind of a slightly sweet, slightly nutty flavour, a lot of that tropical fruit, very much like an Alpine cheese, like Gruyere, or the very famous Comté. There is no accident to that, because this is based, although it's made on the Yorkshire moors, it's based on Alpine cheese like Gruyere. And this is the reason why it's grass-fed, because traditionally when you make cheese in the Alps, you make it during the summer when the cows can go outside, it's not freezing cold, and you make it up and out. So as the snow melts, you take your cattle further and further up the Alp, eating the lovely complex natural pasture. Now, that was a sort of necessity, but that's now been embodied in law. So when you make a Gruyere, and you're allowed to use the word Gruyere, it's because it's grass-fed, because the cattle only making cheese when they're on that grass. In the winter, they may produce milk, but they're not going to make Gruyere. So that's the first one, a purely grass-fed cheese. Grass-fed because it's based on Gruyere and Comté, and Alistair, who makes it, wants to reflect that. Just so you know, his cows are dairy Shorthorns, very traditional British breed. They make lovely milk, not as much milk as a Frisian Holstein, not as big a producer. The milk's very high quality, so you get a lot of that richness, complexity of flavour and that lovely colour. Also, to me, summer cheese will have a very rich, I should show you again, that lovely, rich, warm colour. That tells me the cheese has been made while the cows are out on pasture eating grass. My second cheese is a very traditional cheddar. Well, it's from Wales, so the traditional home of cheddar is more the West Country. This one's from Wales, eminently traditional. It's called Havod. And I think you can see, traditional cheddar is cloth bound. You may just see the imprint of the cloth on the back of this. So again, when you talk about appearance, if I see that round shape and that, the imprint of cloth, I know this is a sort of a traditional cheese. Now, I happen to know this is made in July because I rang up my friend Andy who sells it and asked him. And so in July last year, this cheese is nearly a year old, lovely age for cheddar, about 12 months, good age. They were out on pasture, they were eating grass, but they also get homegrown oats and peas. They're on old lays, so these are fields with that rich, complex pasture, lots of different species of grass and herb, which is good for the cow's health and good again for that complexity. I think that colour is slightly paler than the summer field if I hold them both up. And I wonder if it's because the pasture in the Yorkshire Moors is just a bit richer than the pasture in Ceredigion in West Wales. I hope there are no Welsh people being upset about that. Not really sure though, because Ceredigion is very famous for its pasture. So the cheddar will have a much more savoury, cheddary, there is no better word, it will have a more cheddary flavour than the Summerfield, more of that sort of, it's more salty, less sweet. Now, in terms of the feed, I know that this was a summer cheese, but they will make cheese through the winter. So the cattle go into the barns and they would, I imagine, well, I'm fairly certain they would be fed silage from fermented grass. Interestingly, you know, you ferment milk to make cheese, you ferment grass to make silage. So I love the fact that there's plenty of fermentation going on, and that's a skill. So making good silage is a skill. And you make good silage, it's good and healthy for the animals, and they really enjoy it. The French cheesemakers can be quite against silage. So there are different national beliefs about all this business, and they can be quite contemptuous about us making silage-fed cheese. I think there's a lot more traditional cheese making that's much more seasonal. So there are cheeses in France where you're totally banned from using silage. You can only make it with pure grass. Now, I have a couple of images for you. One image is that when the cows come out of the barns in the spring, they dance. And you can look this up. If you put dancing cows into YouTube or the video medium of your choice, you'll see it's quite anthropomorphic because maybe they don't really dance, but they certainly look very, very happy indeed to have come out of the barn, be dancing about. They love that grass, and the cheesemakers talk about how the milk changes, the character of the milk changes as they come out. You would think then all cheesemakers would love grass, but this is not always the case. So my friend Todd, who makes wonderful Caerphilly, also in Ceredigion, he said, I love the winter. That's how he sounds. I love the winter, fella. He said if he was working in a windowless cellar, he would know it was winter because he can feel it in the milk. And he said the cows are in barns, they're all cozy and warm, and they're eating silage, which they really love. And that's very rich, and it gives that quite thick, rich milk. So I think I, like a lot of people at first, just saw cows as being on grass, saw that as the natural state. The idea of a cow being banged up in a barn, you know, eating something else was a bit upsetting to me. But it's obviously not that simple. Some cheesemakers vastly prefer silage milk because it can be more consistent. You're just eating the same thing every day. Cows wander around, you know, they get into a bit of wild garlic. You can't make cheese out of it because it all tastes of garlic. Which is good if you like that sort of thing, but maybe you don't want garlicky cheddar. So it is more consistent in that way. I know what these animals are fed on because I know who made the cheese. Like I said, I can ring them up, or I can ring the cheesemonger up and be quite clear about that. Our final cheese is a bit of anonymous cheese that I bought from a supermarket. So again, it's square, so it's been made in a great big square mold. These comes from colossal, see, even bigger than this molds. You can't see how big they are. They're colossal, great big square or rectangular blocks. It's also got this seemingly quite rich orange colour. That is because I was a bit cheeky and I brought some cheese that's been dyed. Dyeing cheese has an ancient history, and some of our most well-loved traditional cheeses like Cheshire, Double Gloucester, Red Leicester are dyed with a very a natural inert vegetable dye. But the reason for this is about a bit of sharp practice in marketing from the medieval period, because if you could make any cheese in the winter, it wasn't very good, very pale, very thin, because they weren't eating grass, they were eating whatever scraps they could find. The medieval farmers didn't know about feeding cattle so well in the winter. So winter milk tended to be paler, and the medieval, perhaps slightly duplicitous cheesemaker would dye their cheese to make it look richer and make it look like summer cheese. So this milk, I've got no idea what the animals were fed on, because when you look at the packet, it just says made with British milk. So I don't know which farms it's from. It just says British milk. I mean, as a recovering philosopher, I'd say it might mean made with some British milk and some milk from Azerbaijan, but I'm not a philosopher anymore. Now, what I do suspect, I suspect it's made from the milk of a whole bunch of farms that's been, poured into tankers and then arrived at a dairy. So even in that tanker, that might be mixed. So it would be extremely difficult to trace that milk back and ask the farmer what they fed their animals on. But I suspect that there would be a lot of indoor dairying going on for very high production to make lots of milk, nice and cheap, so that this cheese can be sold, at an eminently affordable price in a supermarket. And whatever we think about methods of production, you just have to accept that. It's important for food to be affordable, and that is a whole other discussion that we could have for hours. Why you get cheaper milk. What I do suspect these animals are fed on would be soy meal, compressed grain meal. I wrote some of these things down because I don't know very much about this kind of feeding. I'm much more into your sort of grass-fed and cider-fed cheeses. Grain-based concentrates, oilseed, minerals, and so on. So there are some issues with that about food miles. Where is the soy grown? How is the soy grown? How does it get here? Interestingly, I had a good look at this, and we don't comparatively feed a great deal of soy compared to other countries, perhaps because our grass is so fantastic and it is quite cheap compared to buying feed. But I imagine that this cheese comes from animals that have been inside almost the time and are really eating a diet much more made of those kinds of products rather than the grass in the field. And there will be many reasons why this is different to a traditional grass-fed or silage-fed cheese. It wouldn't be just about feed, but if you give it a squeeze, very soft. My fingers just go straight through it. It's quite gooey. If I was professionally cheese grading and I was blindfolded, I wouldn't grade this as cheddar, because cheddar in my book, should be hard. Should make fingertips go white. It's quite soft. It smells buttery, very buttery, and slightly sweet. It's called mature cheddar, so it's probably had an enzyme added to it that makes it taste mature, or their idea of mature, and that, I think, is that interesting kind of sweet, slightly buttery, diacetyl smell I'm getting. I'm actually going to eat some out of interest. I don't eat this sort of cheese very much. Well, the texture is very interesting. It's more like Baby Bell than a sort of harder cheddar. A nice flavour. I happen to love Baby Bell. You love the things that you ate when you were a kid. So I love it. I love Yetost. I love squeezing cheese in a tube. I don't dislike this cheese at all. The texture means it would melt really beautifully into that kind of stringy thing. Very clean flavour, not enormously complex. So I think possibly that is an effect of this kind of feed that I suspect is not quite the sort of complex multi-lay pastures and of the traditional cheeses. Not very much length. As soon as I've started talking for a bit, that's rather sort of, there's still a bit there, but it's rather disappeared. Not in any way a horrible experience, perfectly acceptable, makes lovely cheese toasties, but a very different creature from those other two cheeses. If I had anything to say to tie this up, I would say it's quite complicated. Cattles like being inside, they like being outside, they like silage, they like grass. It's all good. How's that? And I think I will hand over to you now, Adam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ned. That was really interesting, actually. And I have to say, I don't know if anyone at home has been trying any of the cheeses with us today, but I've tried the two that we have here, and I've got to say the cheddar is absolutely delightful. And you're right, you do get that really interesting long note at the end of the cheese, and the beginning and the middle and the end. So quite different from a supermarket cheese. You can definitely see that. And the colour is extraordinary. I have to say, I'm not sure. I might have been told at one point in the past, but I'm not sure that I knew exactly about the colour and when the milk was used to make cheeses. In that sense, I'm just looking at my lovely block here, which is rather beautiful. And yeah, I can actually see all of the cotton marks on, or the Hessian marks, whatever it was that went round on the rind of the cheese there, which I don't know, people at home might be able to see a little bit as well. So fantastic cheeses. Orla, what did you think?
I really enjoyed them as well. I didn't know that about Gruyere, and Gruyere being just from grass-fed. I didn't realize that was a requirement of it being sold as Gruyere. The French have much more stringent rules than British and UK generally around food, but that's quite interesting. I used to work in an ice cream parlor in France for a summer, and they had this cream that they brought out of a machine, and I kind of assumed it was like an industrial sort of high pressure thing, but it was from cows and alpine pastures, and it was absolutely beautiful. So I very much enjoyed those cheeses as well.
Great. Thank you, Ned, for sharing that with us. That was very enjoyable, actually. So anyone interested in cheese should check out Ned's website, which I'm sure is a link somewhere or other. Now, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ollie Douglas to our virtual stage. It sounds very grand, to take us through some of the wonderful items in the Museum of English Rural Life. So, Ollie, we might be about to break the records for online visitor numbers, do you think? What have you got for us?
Well, thanks, Adam. Certainly not in-person visitors, because I'm the only person in the museum tonight. You can still visit the museum. You just have to be here during normal opening hours. And I'd encourage you to book a slot in advance, just in case of congestion. We're here at the Museum of English Rural Life at the University of Reading, which I'm pleased to say is where Adam is also based. I'm going to swap my camera around so that you can see the gallery I'm in, hopefully. That will work. This is a gallery called Year on the Farm. I've slightly chopped what I was talking about, just because I wanted very quickly to show you some winter feeding of cattle going on at a particular point in this, and also a silage knife. That's a big traditional knife for chopping silage there. And the reason for this gallery is really talking about seasonality in the countryside and the fact that certain processes remain part of those times of year. Actually, dairying doesn't feature much in here, and that's largely because of the things that Orla explained early on in this session. I'm going to take you now into a gallery called Town and Country, and this is really about that relationship between the town and the countryside, and that's really where our story begins around milk in the museum. We're talking about the mid-19th century and the process by which milk reaches the consumer. So here in this section of the gallery, we're exploring the rise of railways in the mid-19th century and the subsequent transportation of perishables from urban to rural contexts. So obviously milk goes off if you don't get it to the consumer quickly. So you've got to get it there quickly. And the railways make a massive transformation to that process. So urban dairies up until the 18th, early 19th century were very common, and often with cattle fed inside pretty much year round. By the 19th century, the later 19th century and into the 20th century, that idea of cows out in green pastures becomes much more common. We've also got some materials here that help us think about the establishment of regional styles. And we talked a bit about regional cheese making, other things like that, at different scales of dairying and new processes of rural dairying, all on the back of really that shift out into the countryside. Up in the middle here, we've got what's essentially a rucksack for milk. It's a back can, and these were common in hilly locales like the Yorkshire Dales. And they're essentially a way of milking the cattle out in the field. So milking them where they eat, where they live, and then bringing the milk down from the field. And these kind of give way to portable milking solutions. So again, sort of milking cattle out in the field, and this is a portable milking can. So it's got a pulsator on the top. You take these out to the field and have a sort of portable milking setup. And then eventually, pretty much, these all give way to fixed location parlours. And this is a model, sort of teaching model of a dairy parlour that would have been used in the National Institute for Research into Dairying, which is now called CEDARS, but has been sort of based at the University of Reading for many, many years. National Institute for Research into Dairying has one of my favorite acronyms connected with the MERL because it's nerd. Lots of nerds thinking about how to improve dairying practice. So I'm going to walk on up the gallery and we're going to move swiftly on to just talk briefly about the sort of cultural formation of ideas about dairying, how we come to think about dairying as that sort of rural thing that we do. This is in a section all about those sort of cultural icons of the English countryside. Actually, these are French welly boots here, not English ones. They belong to Michael Levis, so the founder of Glastonbury Festival, but also a very famous dairy farmer. And you probably can't see this very well because of the glare, but in there's a bit of Glastonbury ephemera as well, and some of it features those iconic dairy cattle from Worthy Farm. So these ideas about sort of cultural reception of the countryside, how we come to think about the countryside in the way that we do. Actually, that idea about how we come to think about baby bells and food in the way that we do. Here's a nice example of a children's book. What is a cow? Asking that eternal question. Lots of these things play into our ideas about dairy farming and what we think dairy farming is about. Since its inception 70 years ago, the MERL, and this is sort of from the 1950s, this banner, the MERL, the museum, has been a place for amassing the last vestiges of older ways of farming and of making things, so craft practices. The making of back cans is essentially an extinct craft. But we also talk a lot about traditional ways of producing food. And this year we're actually celebrating our 70th anniversary in a project focused on 1951 called 51 Voices. And you can check out the online exhibition and content emerging week by week across the year of that project. And Adam's also involved in that. So I'm excited to mention that project. This gallery is called Forces for Change. And this is really about exploring cultural, social, other contextual influences on decision-making and technical adaptation in farming and in food making. Dairying is important again here. So I'm pleased to say, Ned, we've got the story of traditional cheese making. And this for us is really a late 20th century story. There's a cheese map. So if you come visit, you can explore the cheese map. This is a story about bringing some of those sort of global influences of traditional cheese making to bear on English cheese-making traditions or British cheese-making traditions and reviving that tradition. So it's sort of invented tradition mixed with actual tradition. More importantly, though, we've got a section on selective breeding, genetics, how cows come to be in the first place. Obviously, for the MERL, those of you who know us through our sort of Twitter profile, we've got some absolute units, some big cows, sheep, pigs, other beasts up there in this livestock portraiture. There's a little nod to plant breeding with this Sutton Seeds display case. And actually in there is a type of grass seed that was exported in huge quantities to New Zealand to improve the pastures of New Zealand. About 25% of New Zealand's pastures are made up of rough cocksfoot, which is a European type of grass. So the kind of heavy dairy industry and sheep farming industry they have in New Zealand, entirely reliant on that European grass type being exported to there. So we've got to think about where our grass comes from too as part of this conversation. But what I really wanted to focus on briefly here is Grade Up to Elite Cow. This is a magnificent board game about improving your pedigree dairy herd. You travel around the board. It's essentially like Monopoly, and you improve your dairy herd and try to make it into a pedigree Frisian herd. Actually, you do that by gathering up seamen from seamen companies. So it's effectively a sort of seamen-themed board game. Adam, I'm pleased to say, is doing some work in response to this creatively, with a little bit of funding from the estate of a man who was involved in the production of this board game, the late Charles Stewart, who studied agriculture here at the University of Reading. It's also currently on display, as well as being permanently in these galleries. It's currently on temporary display at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History in an exhibition called Meet the Future, and that's M-E-A-T, not M-E-E-T. Since it's that 70th anniversary, just wanted to very quickly show you this, which is a Festival of Britain wall hanging, which would have been on display in South Bank in London in 1951 in the Country Pavilion of the Festival of Britain. What's really nice about this is it went on display last month. We've just swapped it over with another one. And this one shows Cheshire. We've had mention of Cheshire as a great centre of traditional British cheese. I'm pleased to say that all these cheeses look suitably round, which is nice. They're probably high quality cheeses stored in that shed. It's got cheese all over it, cheese everywhere, and plenty of cattle too. And there's also mention of silage making. So this is all about regional styles of farming again. So there's something really nice about this wall hanging in terms of that conversation of regional styles of farming. I'm going to take you very quickly upstairs, and we're going to talk briefly about a couple of creative engagements with dairying. But as we go, maybe I'll explain a little bit more about portable dairying. I think, and I may be wrong in this, so forgive me if I am, that portable milking machines are much more common in the Southern Hemisphere than they are here. So in New Zealand, there's a lot of contract portable dairying still happens, whereas in the British dairying industry, that's not the case at all. There's a huge amount of dairying equipment off to my left as I walk along here. So milk churns and milk coolers and lots of cheese molds there at the end. And this is what I wanted to show you. This is a huge sort of blown up version of a Charles Tunnicliffe picture of some cattle grazing in fairly traditional looking pasture. Charles Tunnicliffe, better known for his bird artwork, but also known for these pieces of artwork from the iconic Ladybird series, What to Look For. Again, referential to seasonality in British farming. We hold the Ladybird artwork collections here in the university's special collections. And we also hold a huge amount of other material in store. Not all dairying related, obviously. So we've got basketry and lots more material as well. I'm going to pause here and just talk to you very briefly about two relatively recent contemporary art engagements with the theme of dairying. The first one that you're looking at is the work of Maria McKinney. So Maria McKinney is an Irish artist. She came to visit us and looked at all those absolute unit livestock portraits. She also looked through our strawcraft collections, our corn dollies, and she looked through every single one, which not all researchers do. And she went away and she thought about this, and she worked with geneticists who are working on livestock breeding, and she came up with a project called Sire. And Sire resulted in these extraordinary sculptures, and these are made from artificial insemination straws, and they made a series of back sculptures and also head sculptures, kind of crowns, based around those traditional regional corn craft techniques. And then she took photos of them, large-scale portraits like this, that echoed those traditional livestock portraits that I showed you in the gallery downstairs. So that's one contemporary art engagement with livestock and dairying. And there are references in Maria's work to pasture, to milk yield as well. So it's worth checking out the online exhibition that tells the story of her creative process on the museum's website. And I'll also mention another Wellcome Trust funded piece of work, which was undertaken by another Irish artist, actually, Deirdre O'Mahony. And Deirdre worked up in these stores and was exploring various fodder crops for cattle and how they related to the environmental impact of various forms of cattle-based farming. And one of those was sainfoin, so a type of legume, and the impact that might have on reducing methane. And she produces a film piece, which isn't actually available in full, but you can see a trailer for it on the Merrill YouTube. So that's Museum of English World Life YouTube, and look for Speculative Optimism, and you can see a trailer all about her work. But the idea here is that creative practice, much like museum displays and those children's books and Glastonbury Festival, all play a profound role in shaping how we think about the dairy industry. And I'm just finishing with a few of the other dairying objects that are in these stores up here. So we've got butter pats and butter prints and some cheese molds that'll please everyone, hopefully. Unfortunately, I didn't get to eat any of the cheese, so I'll have to rely on everyone else to tell me how it tasted. We don't eat cheese in museums.
Thank you, Ollie. That's fantastic. It was really nice to see the lineage through the gallery, actually, with the silage knife and then the back can, and obviously Elite Cow through to the contemporary art engagements there. Thank you very much. I mean, thank you for doing what you've just done. It was very informative for everyone involved. Now, we've had some questions from the audience, and we've got a few minutes to go through these. So I'm going to just scroll back up to the top here. Now, you're going to have to forgive me, wonderful members of our audience, if I pronounce your names wrong, which is quite probable, so I apologize in advance. So from Annan, question for Orla. How do you see the dairy industry changing in the future? And is there a difference between Ireland, the UK and Europe?
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, that's kind of the research question behind the whole project. So I could give you 3 years worth of answer to that. In terms of the difference between Ireland and the UK, that was something that I was particularly interested in approaching the research, because Ireland's sector is kind of, the farms are smaller, it's more grass-based, it's cooperatised. It seems kind of more what we think of as a traditional dairy industry, but it's 90% export focused, because Ireland has quite a small population and a huge number of dairy farms and cows. So there's kind of a contradiction there between what we might think of as kind of small family farms, export-oriented sector. And I think in both cases, it is going to be, in the UK and Ireland, fewer, bigger farms. And there's talk in both countries about sort of keeping farmers on the land, but there's kind of also an inexorable move towards, farms getting bigger. And then if there isn't an increase in demand, other farmers leaving the industry. And farms, they do, like I was saying with beef and sheep farms, a lot of them are part-time and are hobby because they just love it so much. But I don't think that's going to be the case so much with dairy farming. That hasn't been the case in the past. And I think at the moment, the kind of talk about alternative milks is more, it's not a huge part of the market, but I think it will be interesting to see if that increases and if there's talk about the environmental impacts in Ireland. And I think that was part of the question of what is industrial agriculture, because Irish dairy farming does not look like industrial agriculture, but it's resulting in massive environmental problems at the moment, which have led to a lot of criticism. So I think how countries get to grips with that will be quite interesting to see, and if there will be restrictions put on the Irish dairy sector. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think there's a need for big change in terms of the environmental impacts of all aspects of life and agriculture as well. Whether that's realised and how that's realised, I think remains to be seen, which is quite a vague summing up point.
Great, thank you, Orla. I hope that's helpful. So we have an anonymous one here for Ned. And this one goes, you said you don't know much about grain-fed dairy products. Has this made you want to find out more?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great point. I feel slightly shamed because I ought to know about this kind of thing a lot more. And I do, in a sense, try not to make kind of value judgments about different sorts of cheese and different sorts of farming. And in a really universal perspective, you wouldn't make any value judgments about anything, and often we find that the thing we think is less natural or something has less of an effect, say if it's more sustainable. It definitely does a lot more. Yeah, that was a rubbish answer. All this was better. It was useful.
Thank you, Ned. That's wonderful. There's a lovely comment that's been fed to me here from Viber. Again, if I pronounced that wrong, I do apologise. And it goes, "You are so right about the feed and taste. Tastiest milk I've had was from a complex feed, my mum's cows, Jersey and Sahiwal, don't know how to pronounce that one. They ate grass, special berseem plant, elephant grass, Kali Chuni. This was India nearly 4 decades ago. I haven't had such milk and fresh milk products, yogurt, butter, buttermilk ever since." So that's quite an interesting little bit of internationalism there, just in relation to the taste of milk and also what cows eat. And I'm so sorry I can't pronounce all of those different things. Then we go down. So I think this is probably a bit of a question, I suppose, for everyone, but probably more so for perhaps Ollie and Ned. And this is from Herbert, and he says, "I live in Stilton country, where the whey was traditionally fed to pigs, which then were made into Melton Mowbray pork pies. What else did other areas do to use the whey?"
Ollie?
That's a really good question, and I have absolutely no idea. So there are things that I still need to learn as well.
Well,
are there uses of whey in other countries, Ned?
Well, funnily enough, loads of people fed it to pigs. The Romans fed it to pigs, and there's some lovely stuff about Roman cheese making where they're really specific. So, you make this much cheese, you need this many pigs, and they're really clear about it. So the feeding of waste pigs was really common, and it's elegant to me. So you've got grass that feeds the cattle. That you make cheese, the whey feeds the pigs dung the land, which feeds the land, which then feeds the animals. And I think that rhymes in Anglo-Saxon or something. The other use that I know that I find fascinating is the Norwegian boiled whey cheese called Gjetost, which is brown. It's like toffee. I got into trouble for eating it at school in the 70s because you weren't allowed sweets in school in the 70s, and they wouldn't believe it was cheese. So the other thing, apart from feeding it to pigs, was to make Gjetost. That's what I know.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Ollie. Orla, do you have any insight here?
No, I don't know much about what whey is used for, I'm afraid. And I think these days most dairy farms tend to be specialised. So yeah, so there isn't that mixed farm. That's probably more a thing of the past. These days, farms produce one thing or maybe two.
Thank you. And there's one last question I'd kind of like to ask Ollie. Is I wonder if you have a kind of favourite museum piece, something that is a real standout to you in relation to dairy.
I think at the moment, just because I'm thinking an awful lot about 1951, it's got to be that Cheshire wall hanging. There's a really nice thing about that. I'd mentioned a little nod to the sort of colonial legacies of land use in New Zealand. I know for a fact that those series of wall hangings quite possibly went to the global south in the early 1950s at some point, long before they came to be displayed here. So that one went on display this year. The one preceding that went on display in 2016. So we've only had a couple of those wall hangings out. And they talk really strongly to that idea of traditional regional landscapes and forms of farming that are situated in those landscapes. So although there isn't a direct reference to those sort of traditions of whey use, it's exactly that kind of variety of British farming situated in the landscapes, connects back to the different breeds that are developed for different landscape spaces and places. And perhaps a really nice thing to finish on is the fact that, I'm just going to turn my camera around, the Festival of Britain, this is the Festival of Britain Country Pavilion, hopefully you can see that, had in it a milk bar. So there's a little cow there, you can see the milk bar. And this was one of the very first contexts in the UK where people were able to buy chilled milk, which is a really nice thing to be thinking about on a day like this where it's been so phenomenally hot. The idea of a nice gold glass of ice cold milk. So the Festival of Britain, I think that wall hanging is my key piece at the moment.
Thank you, Ollie. That's fantastic. And thank you, Ned and Orla as well. Thank you to our audience for asking some very interesting questions. Now I'm going to hand back now to Orla for the last little bit. Orla has one last question for the audience, I believe. Orla.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask the same question again. So do you think cows should graze for part of the year? You don't have to change your answer. I just wanted to check if the percentage has changed. It was 90% before. And usually when people are asked this question, they think about animal welfare. They think about this kind of process of industrialization. We had a lot today about the taste, which I think doesn't get talked about as much. And that was really, really valuable. And Ireland, like I say, where the vast majority of dairy produce is produced from grass, they really market that and capitalize on that. A leading here saying that dairy produce from grass is seen as healthier as well in terms of omega-3s. Oh, wow. Okay. So the answer is in, and 95% now think that cows should graze. So I think it was the cheese, the beautiful smell and color of the cheese and taste more than anything that did it. So thank you all very, very much for coming today and participating, asking questions and answering. And thank you to Adam, Ned and Ollie and to the British Academy for putting this on. And the festival continues till the 19th of this month. So if you're interested, look on their social media and their website. And there's some more really, really fascinating events coming up. So thank you very much for attending and enjoy your cheese. Thank you.